The wind howled through Sweetwater Creek like a banshee, scattering dust and secrets alike as Vivian Rose stepped off the stagecoach, her face turned away from the curious onlookers who had gathered to see the new arrivals. At 34, she was neither young nor old, but the harsh Montana sun and years of hardship had etched fine lines around her eyes and mouth, marks that had become her shame in the city she'd fled. It was 1885, and Vivian had come west with nothing but a small trunk of belongings and the desperate hope that a small frontier town would offer what Philadelphia had not a chance to start anew, where no one knew her story. Where no one would whisper about how a woman her age remained unmarried, or how the passing years had begun to show on her once celebrated complexion. "Need help with that trunk, madam?" the stagecoach driver called down, already loosening the straps that secured her belongings. "Thank you," Vivian replied, keeping her face partially obscured by the wide brim of her bonnet. She'd learned that trick in Philadelphia hide what they would judge. The driver dropped her trunk unceremoniously to the ground, kicking up another cloud of dust that settled on Vivian's dark blue traveling dress. With a tip of his hat, he was already moving on, helping the other passengers, a young couple and an older gentleman in a suit too fine for the frontier. Vivian stood alone, surveying the single dusty street lined with wooden buildings. Sweetwater Creek had been described to her as growing, which she now realized was a generous assessment. A general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small hotel, and a smattering of other establishments made up the town center. Beyond that, only scattered homesteads and the vast, untamed wilderness of the Montana Territory. She picked up her trunk with effort and made her way toward what she hoped was the hotel. Each step felt like a decision, a commitment to this new life she'd chosen out of desperation more than desire. "You must be the new schoolteacher," a voice called out, stopping Vivian in her tracks. She turned to find a woman in her 50s, gray-streaked hair pulled back in a severe bun, watching her with assessing eyes. "Yes," Vivian confirmed, straightening her spine. "I'm Miss Vivian Rose." "Martha Wilkins, head of the town council," the woman replied, not offering her hand. Her eyes traveled over Vivian's face, lingering on the lines at the corners of her eyes. "You're older than we expected." The familiar shame washed over Vivian. Even here, hundreds of miles from Philadelphia, the first thing noticed was her age, the subtle markers of time passing across her face. She'd hoped the desperate need for educated women in these frontier towns would outweigh such concerns. "I assure you I'm quite qualified," Vivian said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I taught for 12 years at the Briarwood School for Girls." Martha's lips thinned. The position was meant for a younger woman. Children respond better to youth and vitality, and we had hoped. She didn't need to finish the thought. Vivian understood all too well. They had hoped for a fresh-faced girl who might attract one of the town's eligible bachelors, not a spinster with lines beginning to crease her face. "The contract has been signed," Vivian said firmly. "I've traveled quite far at considerable expense." Martha sighed. "The schoolhouse is at the end of town. We've prepared rooms for you above it. School begins on Monday." She hesitated, then added with a note of resignation, "Welcome to Sweetwater Creek, Miss Rose." As Martha walked away, Vivian felt the weight of familiar disappointment. She'd fled east to escape judgment only to find it waiting for her in the west. Still, she had nowhere else to go. This remote outpost, unwelcoming as it seemed, was now her home. The next morning, Vivian rose early to explore the schoolhouse that would become her domain. The single-room wooden building was surprisingly well-maintained, with rows of rough-hewn benches and desks, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, and a small desk at the front for the teacher. She ran her fingers over the smooth surface of her desk, imagining the children who would soon fill these empty benches. Teaching had always been her solace, the one place where her knowledge and patience mattered more than her appearance or marital status. "You must be the new schoolmarm." The deep voice startled her. Vivian turned to find a man standing in the doorway, his broad shoulders nearly filling the frame. He wore the practical clothes of a rancher-worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves revealing sun-bronzed forearms, and a wide-brimmed hat he now held in his hands. "I am," she replied, fighting the urge to turn away to hide her face from yet another person who would see only the faint lines and not the woman behind them. He stepped into the room, boots echoing on the wooden floor. "Jackson Deveraux. Most folks call me Jack. I run the Double D ranch north of town." He extended a calloused hand. Vivian hesitantly took it, surprised by the gentle firmness of his grip. Vivian Rose. In the morning light streaming through the windows, she could see him clearly now. He was tall and sturdy, built by years of hard work rather than deliberate exercise. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. She guessed him to be around 40, with dark hair just beginning to silver at the temples and a neatly trimmed beard that did little to soften the strong line of his jaw. "My niece Emma will be one of your students," he explained. "She's living with me since my sister passed last winter." "I'm sorry for your loss," Vivian said softly. Jack nodded, his blue eyes solemn. "Emma's 10. Smart as a whip but prone to mischief. Thought I'd warn you." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And introduce myself proper before the town gossips beat me to it." There was something disarming about his straightforward manner, the way his eyes met hers directly without the usual flicker of judgment or dismissal she'd grown accustomed to. "The town gossips have likely already formed their opinions," Vivian said before she could stop herself. Jack's eyebrow quirked. "Folks talk, nature of small towns." He glanced around the schoolroom. "You need any help getting this place ready? Got some time before I need to head back to the ranch." Vivian hesitated, surprised by the offer. "I was hoping to hang these maps," she gestured to the rolled parchments she'd brought from Philadelphia, "but I'm afraid the walls are too high for me to reach comfortably." Jack set his hat on a student desk and rolled his sleeves up further. "Happy to help. Been meaning to thank you anyway, for coming out here. Not many educated women willing to leave civilization for a place like Sweetwater." As they worked together hanging maps and arranging the schoolroom, Vivian found herself relaxing in Jack's presence. He asked intelligent questions about her teaching philosophy and shared stories about the town and its inhabitants without a hint of the condescension she'd come to expect. "Martha Wilkins give you her usual warm welcome?" he asked with a knowing glint in his eye as he hammered a nail into the wall. Vivian laughed despite herself. "Is she always so?" "Prickly as a cactus," Jack finished, "only to newcomers and folks who cross her, and most days ending in Y." His easy humor loosened something tight in Vivian's chest. For the first time since arriving, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps Sweetwater Creek might eventually feel like home. "There," Jack said, stepping back to admire the last map they'd hung. "World geography. These kids won't know what hit him." "Thank you," Vivian said sincerely. "You've been very kind, Mr. Deveraux." "Jack," he corrected with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "We're not much for formalities out here." He retrieved his hat, dusting it against his leg before settling it on his head. "Town socials Saturday night at the church. Good way to meet folks. Hope you'll come." With that, he tipped his hat and was gone, leaving Vivian with the strange sensation that something important had just happened, though she couldn't quite name what it was. The next few days passed in a flurry of preparation for the start of school. Vivian arranged her small living quarters above the schoolhouse, organized books and supplies, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed her on her infrequent trips to the general store. "Older than we expected," she overheard one woman say to another. "Poor thing's nearly haggard," came the reply, followed by a pitying cluck of the tongue. Vivian's steps faltered, but she forced herself to continue walking, chin high. She had endured worse in Philadelphia, where the daughters of society matrons had once been her students and later became her judges. inviting her to tease only to whisper behind their fans about how time had not been kind to their former teacher. She had thought herself prepared for the scrutiny of Sweetwater Creek, but each new slight reopened wounds that had barely begun to heal. By Saturday morning, the prospect of attending the social filled her with dread rather than anticipation. "I simply won't go," she told her reflection as she brushed her chestnut hair, noting the few strands of silver that had appeared in recent months. She twisted her hair into its usual severe bun, a style chosen more to draw attention away from her face than for practicality. But as evening approached, Vivian found herself changing into her best dress, a deep green that had once been called flattering to her complexion and pinching color into her cheeks. If she was to be the town's teacher, she would need to meet the parents of her students. Professional obligation outweighed personal discomfort. The church was lit with lanterns when she arrived, casting a warm glow over the gathered townsfolk. Music from a fiddle and piano filled the air, and tables laden with food lined one wall. Children darted between groups of adults, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the deeper rumble of conversation. Vivian paused at the entrance, gathering her courage. Before she could step inside, a small figure crashed into her skirts. "Sorry, madam." A girl with braided blonde hair and bright blue eyes looked up at her. "I was racing Billy Fletcher and didn't see you." "That's quite all right," Vivian replied, straightening her skirts. "You must be careful, though. Racing is better suited to outdoors." The girl studied her curiously. "Are you the new teacher? Uncle Jack said you were coming tonight." "Emma," Vivian guessed, recognizing Jack Deveraux' eyes in the child's face. Emma nodded vigorously. "That's me. Are you really from Philadelphia? Billy says they have buildings tall as mountains there, but I think he's fibbing." Before Vivian could answer, Jack appeared behind his niece. "Emma, what have I told you about bombarding folks with questions?" He looked up at Vivian with an apologetic smile. "Miss Rose, glad you could make it." Something in Vivian's chest loosened at the genuine warmth in his greeting. "I nearly didn't," she admitted. "Then I'm especially glad you changed your mind." Jack offered his arm. "May I introduce you around? Best to meet everyone at once and get it over with, like pulling a tooth." Despite her nervousness, Vivian laughed. "Not the most encouraging comparison, Mr. Deveraux." "Jack," he reminded her, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "And trust me, these folks' bark is worse than their bite, mostly." With Jack at her side, the introductions proved less daunting than Vivian had feared. Some townsfolk were openly curious, others reserved, but Jack's obvious respect seemed to influence their reception. He was clearly well regarded in Sweetwater Creek, and his easy manner helped smooth over awkward moments. "And this is Harriet Palmer, our resident busybody," Jack said with good-natured teasing as he introduced an elderly woman with twinkling eyes and a mischievous smile. "Ignore this ruffian," Harriet said, patting Vivian's hand. "I merely take an interest in my community. Someone must keep these heathens civilized." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I'm delighted to have another unmarried lady in town. The men here are in desperate need of refinement." Jack rolled his eyes but smiled fondly at the older woman. "Harriet's been trying to marry off every bachelor in Sweetwater since she arrived in '68. Consider yourself warned." "Some of us appreciate the finer things in life," Harriet sniffed, looking pointedly at Jack's practical attire. "Like a gentleman who occasionally wears something besides denim and flannel." As the evening progressed, Vivian found herself relaxing. The music was lively, the food plentiful, and despite occasional curious glances at her face, most people seemed genuinely welcoming. When Jack asked her to dance, she accepted without the hesitation that would have plagued her in Philadelphia. "You move well for a cowboy," she remarked as he guided her confidently through the steps of a country dance. "My mother insisted all her boys learn to dance proper," he replied with a grin. "Said no son of hers would shame her at socials by stumbling around like a newborn calf." Vivian laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. A wise woman. "That she was," Jack agreed, his expression softening with memory. "She'd have liked you, I think." The simple compliment warmed Vivian more than it should have. They continued dancing, conversation flowing easily between them until the music ended and Martha Wilkins appeared at Vivian's elbow. "Miss Rose, a moment of your time," Martha said, her tone making it clear this was not a request. She led Vivian away from Jack toward a group of women who Vivian recognized as mothers of her future students. "The ladies have some concerns about your methods," Martha said, her voice carrying just enough to ensure several nearby conversations halted. "My methods?" Vivian repeated, confused. "School hasn't even begun." One of the women, whom Jack had introduced as Beatrice Fletcher, spoke up. "We heard you taught at some fancy Eastern school for girls. Our children need practical education, not airs and graces." "And discipline," added another woman. "Western children aren't like your delicate Eastern flowers." Vivian straightened her spine. "I assure you, ladies, my curriculum is both practical and rigorous. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and geography, all essential skills regardless of location." Martha's eyes narrowed. "We also have concerns about your suitability. Teaching is demanding work." "At your age, at my age," Vivian interrupted, her voice steady despite the familiar hurt. "I have over a decade of experience managing classrooms of 30 or more students. I've developed methods that engage children of all temperaments and abilities." She met Martha's gaze directly. "The lines on my face represent years of dedication to my profession, Mrs. Wilkins. They are hardly a disability." A tense silence followed her words. Vivian's heart pounded, but she refused to look away. She had fled Philadelphia rather than stand her ground. She would not make the same mistake again. "Well said, Miss Rose." The deep voice behind her sent a ripple of relief through Vivian's tense shoulders. Jack stepped to her side, not touching her but close enough that his presence felt like support. "Anyone who can keep Emma in line for more than 5 minutes has my vote of confidence," he continued, his casual tone belying the steel in his gaze as he looked at Martha. "And I reckon most folks here feel the same." Several men and women nodded, including Harriet Palmer, who stepped forward to link her arm through Vivian's. "I, for one, am delighted to have a teacher with actual experience," Harriet declared. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Martha, I was just about to ask Miss Rose to join me for some punch." As Harriet led her away, Vivian glanced back to see Jack engaged in what appeared to be a pointed conversation with Martha, his expression serious but controlled. "Don't you worry about Martha," Harriet said, patting Vivian's arm. "She runs the general store and thinks that means she runs the town, but folks here make up their own minds." "I didn't come here looking for conflict," Vivian sighed. "Course not." "But standing your ground isn't the same as looking for a fight." Harriet handed her a cup of punch. "And if I might say so, you handled that with more grace than Martha deserved." The remainder of the evening passed without further incident, though Vivian noticed Martha keeping her distance. As the social wound down, Jack appeared at her side again. "May I walk you home?" he asked, his expression revealing nothing of his conversation with Martha. Vivian hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." They walked in companionable silence through the quiet town, the only sounds their footsteps and the distant piano still playing in the church. "I apologize for Martha," Jack said finally as they approached the schoolhouse. "She's not a bad sort, just set in her ways. Thinks she knows what's best for everyone." "You needn't apologize for her," Vivian replied. "I'm accustomed to such assessments." Jack stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "It's not right, judging folks by something so meaningless." Vivian's laugh held little humor. "The world judges women by their appearance above all else, Mr. Deveraux. Surely that's as true in Montana as in Philadelphia." "Jack," he corrected automatically, then shook his head. "Maybe so, doesn't make it right." He studied her face, his gaze direct but gentle. "Know what my father used to say? He told me the lines on a person's face tell their story. Laugh lines, worry lines, thinking lines, they're all chapters in the book of a life. The unexpected poetry from this practical rancher caught Vivian off guard. "A lovely sentiment," she said softly. Jack stepped closer, his expression earnest in the silvery light. "It's the truth. Those lines the busybodies whisper about, they're lines of beauty, Miss Rose, marks of a life fully lived." Something shifted in Vivian's chest, a loosening of a tightness she hadn't realized had become so familiar. No one had ever spoken of her subtle signs of aging with such simple appreciation. In Philadelphia, even her friends had recommended creams and potions to preserve her youth, as if the passing of time were a failure rather than an inevitability. "Vivian," she said quietly. "If I'm to call you Jack, you must call me Vivian." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes, lines she now saw as evidence of joy rather than age. "Vivian, then. Good night." "Good night, Jack." As she climbed the stairs to her rooms, Vivian felt something she hadn't expected to find in Sweetwater Creek hope. The following weeks brought the challenges and rewards of teaching in a frontier town. Vivian's students ranged from 6 to 16 years of age, with vastly different levels of previous education. Some, like Emma Deveraux, were quick learners eager for knowledge. Others required patience and creative approaches to engage their interest. Contrary to Martha Wilkins' predictions, the children responded well to Vivian's firm but kind teaching style. By the end of the first month, even Martha had grudgingly admitted that the students were making good progress. Jack became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, initially using Emma as his excuse, but soon dropping any pretense. He would arrive after school hours bearing small gifts, wild flowers, a particularly interesting rock he'd found on his property, once a book of poetry he'd ordered from Denver that he thought she might enjoy. Their friendship grew with each visit, conversations ranging from literature to ranching, from philosophy to the practical challenges of frontier life. Vivian found herself looking forward to his visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and terrified her. "You should see the ranch," Jack suggested one October afternoon as they sat on the schoolhouse steps watching Emma play with classmates in the yard. "Sunday, perhaps. Emma's been asking to show you her pony." Vivian hesitated. "I wouldn't want to impose." "It's not an imposition when you're invited," Jack replied, his blue eyes warm as they met hers. "Besides, I've been wanting to show you the place. It's nothing grand, but it's home." The Double D Ranch exceeded Vivian's expectations. The main house was a substantial log structure with a wide porch, surrounded by barns, corrals, and outbuildings. Fields stretched toward distant mountains, cattle grazing peacefully in the autumn sunshine. Emma proudly showed Vivian her pony, a gentle dappled mare named Buttercup, while Jack prepared lunch. The domesticity of the scene, Jack in his kitchen, the aroma of fresh bread and stew filling the air created a yearning in Vivian she'd long ago resigned herself to never satisfying. After lunch, Jack suggested a ride to see more of the property. Vivian admitted with embarrassment that she'd never learned to ride. "Never too late to learn," Jack said, leading her to the stable where he saddled a calm older mare. "Daisy here is gentler than a kitten, perfect for beginners." With patient instruction and his steadying hand at her back, Vivian found herself atop the horse, terror gradually giving way to cautious enjoyment as they moved at a walking pace through a meadow dotted with late wildflowers. "See, you're a natural," Jack encouraged as she grew more confident. Vivian laughed. "Hardly, but it's less frightening than I imagined." They stopped at the crest of a small hill overlooking a stream, dismounting to let the horses graze while they sat on a fallen log. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the landscape, highlighting the changing colors of autumn. "It's beautiful," Vivian said softly. "Your land." Jack nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Been in the family since my pa came west in '53, built it from nothing." He glanced at her. "Must seem awfully primitive compared to Philadelphia." "Philadelphia has its charms," Vivian admitted. "Museums, libraries, theaters. But it also has a coldness I never noticed until I came here. People living side by side yet isolated by rules and expectations." "And here?" Jack asked. Vivian considered the question. "Here life feels more immediate, less concerned with appearances and more with substance," she smiled ruefully. "Though not entirely, as Martha Wilkins would be quick to remind us." Jack's expression darkened. "Has she been giving you trouble again?" "Nothing I can't handle," Vivian assured him. "Just the occasional comment about how the position should have gone to someone with more vitality." Jack's hand covered hers where it rested on the log between them. "Martha's wrong. You've brought more life to that schoolhouse than it's seen in years." The simple touch of his calloused hand on hers sent warmth spreading up Vivian's arm. She looked down at their hands, his large and sun-browned, hers smaller and paler but equally marked by work and time. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing beyond." "Beyond what?" Jack prompted when she trailed off. Vivian gestured vaguely at her face. "These marks of time that seemed to define me in others' eyes." Jack's free hand gently turned her face toward his. "Those lines around your eyes. They show me you've spent years smiling, sharing your knowledge with children who needed it. The ones here," his thumb brushed lightly near the corner of her mouth, "tell me you've known sorrow but haven't let it embitter you." His touch was feather-light, respectful, but it sent her heart racing. "Jack," she whispered, not sure if she was asking him to stop or continue. "I see you, Vivian Rose," he said, his voice low and earnest. "Not just parts of you, all of you, and what I see is beautiful." The sincerity in his blue eyes undid her. Tears welled up, spilling over before she could stop them. Jack's thumb gently wiped away a tear. "I've upset you," he said, starting to withdraw his hand. Vivian caught it, holding it against her cheek. "No, it's just... It's been a very long time since anyone looked at me and saw something worthy of admiration." Something fierce flashed in Jack's eyes. "Then they were blind fools." The declaration hung in the air between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. After a moment, Jack cleared his throat and stood, offering his hand to help her up. "We should head back before Emma thinks we've abandoned her to the kitchen chores." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, each lost in thoughts of what had passed between them. Emma's excited chatter about her day's adventures filled the silence during the journey back to town. But as they reached the schoolhouse, the girl tactfully announced she would wait in the wagon. Jack walked Vivian to her door, lingering on the steps. "Sunday dinner at the ranch is a standing invitation," he said. "For as many Sundays as you'd care to accept." Vivian smiled, newfound confidence warming her voice. "I believe I'd like that very much." "Good," Jack replied simply. Then, with a gentle touch to her hand that held more meaning than any flowery speech, he turned and walked back to his wagon. As winter settled over Sweetwater Creek, Vivian found herself flourishing rather than merely surviving. Her students were making remarkable progress. The community had largely accepted her, and her friendship with Jack had deepened into something that, while still unnamed, brought joy to her days. Sunday dinners at the Double D became a cherished ritual. Sometimes they rode out to explore some corner of Jack's property. Other times they simply sat by the fire reading or talking while Emma worked on schoolwork or played with the barn cats. In those peaceful moments, Vivian could almost imagine this was her life, not a temporary refuge, but a home. It was during one such Sunday in early December, as snow fell gently outside the windows of Jack's comfortable parlor, that something shifted between them. Emma had gone to bed, and they sat side by side on the sofa. A single lamp casting warm light over the book of Tennyson's poetry, they were taking turns reading aloud. Jack's deep voice gave resonance to the romantic verses, and when he finished reading Locksley Hall, the silence that followed felt charged with unspoken feelings. "I should go," Vivian said reluctantly, though the thought of the cold ride back to town held little appeal. "It's getting late." "Stay," Jack said, then quickly added, "the guest room is always ready. The snow's coming down harder now. Roads will be treacherous." Vivian hesitated, knowing that even in a frontier town like Sweetwater Creek, her reputation as the schoolteacher made such arrangements questionable. Reading her concern, Jack smiled. Emma's here as chaperone, and frankly, I care more about your safety than town gossip." The simple declaration decided her. "Then thank you, I'll stay." Later, dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, Vivian stood at the guest room window watching snow transform the ranch into a pristine wonderland. A soft knock at the door drew her attention. "Just wanted to make sure you have enough blankets," Jack said when she opened the door. He stood in the hallway, respectfully keeping the threshold between them. "Gets cold up here at night." "I'm quite comfortable, thank you," Vivian assured him. Jack nodded but made no move to leave. "Vivian," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "Yes." "I've been meaning to tell you. Ask you really?" He ran a hand through his hair, uncharacteristically nervous. "These past months, having you here, it's been wonderful," Vivian finished softly when he trailed off. Relief and something deeper warmed his eyes. "Yes, exactly that." He took a deep breath. "I'm not much for pretty speeches. Never had your way with words, but I need to say this plain. I love you, Vivian Rose." The declaration, simple and direct, stole her breath. "Jack, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "I know it might seem sudden, though it doesn't feel sudden to me. I've known since that first day in the schoolhouse that you were someone special." Vivian stepped closer to the doorway, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from him. "It doesn't feel sudden to me either," she admitted. "But I'm afraid you're not seeing clearly. I'm not young anymore, Jack. The years have left their mark. And someday those marks will deepen," and Jack's finger gently touched her lips, stopping the flow of worried words. "Every line on your face is a line of beauty to me, Vivian. They're the map of a life well lived, a heart that's known joy and sorrow and kept on beating anyway." His hand moved to cup her cheek. "I don't want some untouched girl with no history written on her skin. I want you exactly as you are, exactly as you'll become as we grow older together." Tears welled in Vivian's eyes, but unlike the tears she'd shed in Philadelphia, these were born of joy rather than shame. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have since you hung those maps and told me about your mother teaching you to dance." Jack's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes, those beautiful lines that spoke of joy and laughter through the years. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand, and when he pulled back, his eyes held a question. In answer, Vivian rose on tiptoe and returned the kiss with greater certainty. Jack's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer but still maintaining the respectful distance of the doorway between them. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said simply. "Be Emma's mother, be my wife. Make this your home, not just on Sundays but every day." "Yes," Vivian replied without hesitation. "Yes to all of it." They were married in the church on Christmas Eve with Emma as their attendant and the whole town in witness. Even Martha Wilkins offered reluctant congratulations, though Harriet Palmer's enthusiastic embrace nearly knocked the breath from Vivian's lungs. "I knew it," Harriet declared triumphantly. "The moment I saw him looking at you at that first social." Never seen Jack Deveraux look at anyone that way before. As they drove back to the ranch, her home now, snow began to fall again, dusting the landscape with fresh powder that glittered in the moonlight. "Happy?" Jack asked, his arm secure around her shoulders. Vivian leaned into his embrace, watching Emma doze against the other side of the wagon. "Perfectly," she replied. "Though I'm still not entirely convinced this isn't a dream." Jack's chuckle rumbled against her side. "If it is, we're sharing the same one." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I plan to keep dreaming it with you for at least the next 50 years. 50 years, Vivian thought. 50 years of laughter and love, of teaching and learning, of watching Emma grow into a woman. 50 years of new lines forming on both their faces, worry lines, laugh lines, thinking lines. Lines of beauty marking the passage of time spent together. As the ranch house came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light, Vivian felt a sense of completion she'd never known in Philadelphia. Here, in this wild, beautiful country, with this man who saw her true self beyond surface appearances, She had found not just acceptance but celebration of every part of her past, present, and the future they would write together. Jack helped her down from the wagon, his strong hands steady at her waist. In his eyes, she saw not just love but genuine admiration for her mind, her spirit, and yes, even for the gentle lines that time had etched upon her face. "Welcome home, Mrs. Deveraux," he said softly. Vivian smiled, feeling the happiness crinkle the corners of her eyes, those lines of beauty that had led her to this moment, this man, this perfect happiness. "It's good to be home," she replied, and knew she had found where she truly belonged.